Okay, I'm gonna pause it because we don't want
to Shelley's presentation and to hold our community forum afterwards. The one thing that we are not able to do is we, the commissioners, committee members, are not going to be able to answer questions of the audience. However, and Freddie, correct me if I'm wrong on this, if there were any questions for Shelley from an audience member, that's entirely fine. But what we can't do as committee members is engage in any kind of public deliberation. With all that being said, the purpose of tonight is to answer questions. So if there are any for the committee, we would invite you to please email those to us so that we can address them at our next meeting, where we will have an agenda item that we would welcome you to attend, where we can actually discuss this. As it turns out, with 2 of our empty seats, I believe our planning board representative, I believe the planning board has picked a representative to sit on the CPC. And I've heard a rumor that Shopsy may also have done that, giving us 2 more members, which will make it much easier for us to assemble a quorum. So I'm quite confident we'll be able to do that for our next meeting. So we will still be able to have a productive meeting this evening, with just that one limitation that we can't deliberate or answer questions. Kristen has said previously that she'll be able to attend. Hopefully she'll be joining us in the next few minutes. But Shelley, wanted to welcome you and thank you so much for joining us here this evening. We don't want to hold you up at all. We've been actually anxiously looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Great, thank you. Do you want me to get started?
That would be great. Thank you.
Great, and I just don't know if I've been given permission to share my screen yet.
Yes, I think you can. You should be all set. Try it. If not, I'll try something else. But
so it says that host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, hold on. Hold on. All right, let's try this. All right, you should be all right.
Okay, can you see slides?
I can see has started screen sharing, but only a black thing's come up.
Same here.
I think it's loading.
There we go.
Some of you see it?
There, yes, can see it.
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, great. So, and it's the, can you, are you able to see what I'm saying as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's funny. We had that for our Housing Institute a couple of weeks ago, and I apparently didn't turn it off. Okay, so maybe that will help you if I am speaking too fast or not clear. So my name is Shelley Garing, and I am Senior Program Manager at MHP, Mass Housing Partnership. So tonight we're going to talk about CPA, community housing, and a little bit on housing trusts. I am perfectly fine with you interrupting if you have questions, if you're not understanding something, if I'm using acronyms and forgetting to explain them. So please don't be shy. And I don't know how you normally do that, if how you would manage that, but I don't have any problem being interrupted.
Shelley, may I take you up on that right now?
Yep. Yep.
So we as committee members, of course, can't really do that. However, we have folks in the audience. So what I'd like to suggest is that anyone in the audience who wishes to ask a question, use the raise hand function in Zoom, and we will attempt to
manage that.
Yeah, and if we see a hand go up, and then Betsy, perhaps you could promote the person up to ask their question to Shelley.
Okay, fantastic. So just a little bit about MHP, if you're maybe not familiar, our mission really is to increase the supply of affordable housing across the state. And we have kind of 4 different buckets that we really focus on in our efforts. One, we have the Center for Housing Data. So we have a small team of people that are collecting, analyzing, and sharing data to help inform effective policy on the local, regional, as well as state level. We have the community assistance team, which I'm a part of, and our focus really is to help build the capacity to support affordable housing on the local level, as well as we work with housing authorities, as well as nonprofit organizations. We have a lending team, which is really how we stay afloat as an agency. We've lent over $1.4 billion to create and preserve over 27,000 units of affordable rental housing. And then we have a homeownership team that is helping to support access to affordable housing for households earning up to 100% of the area at median income with innovative products like the One Mortgage product. So today I wanted to start by covering a little bit of basics around CPA and community housing. And because I don't know where you're starting from, some of it might feel a little bit basic, and I don't mean to talk down to anyone, but just wanting to make sure we're on kind of the same plane. And I'm going to get into some of the eligible activities, the kinds of things that as a CPC, and really as well as a housing trust, if there's anyone from the housing trust here tonight, the kinds of things that you can be investing in. And then last, I'm just going to give some suggestions around CPCs working with affordable housing trusts as well. So CPA and community housing, of course, you know that it's one of the key buckets. And this is just the graph that you've probably seen from the Community Preservation Coalition. I borrowed it from them. You see on the left, the different verbs that we use with CPA: acquire, create, preserve, support, rehab, and restore. And then across the top, the different categories. And then housing outlined in or highlighted in blue, that all of these different verbs apply to community housing under CPA. Acquire, create, preserve, support. You see that support is only for housing, and it really was included in CPA statute because of an understanding of just how complicated and complex affordable housing is, and wanting to offer the ability to have a bit more support for getting affordable housing development going. And then rehab and restore is possible, but only with housing units that were acquired or created with CPA funds. So that's really important to remember. And then just to get into the definitions a little bit, because we're going to talk a lot about these verbs a lot. So acquire in the statute is obtained by gift, purchase, device, grant, rental purchase, lease, or otherwise. Create is technically not formally defined in the statute. It generally speaks to new development or reuse, reusing old buildings or underutilized buildings for affordable housing. Preserve is really a high bar in the CPA statute. It's protect real property from injury, harm, or destruction. So it's not rehab, it's really a higher bar. And then support is a more recent definition, although now, it's probably been 7 years or so, but it's to provide grants, loans, rental assistance, or other forms of assistance. And then in this definition, the phrase "for the purpose of making housing affordable" was included. And the intent really was that CPA the purpose of CPA with community housing is really to make housing affordable. And then rehab and restore, again, if it's acquired or created with CPA, then you can be using CPA funds for rehab of housing units. And then just to point out a couple things, Section 12 of the Community Preservation Act says that when a real property interest is acquired with CPA funds, it shall be bound by a permanent restriction. So this is with the acquire verb. So if you use CPA funds, any amount of CPA funds, even if there are other resources in the deal, if CPA funds are in the deal, then there needs to be a restriction in perpetuity, an affordable restriction in perpetuity. The challenge is when communities want to purchase land that might be used for mixed use, where there might be some commercial, or mixed income, where it's above 100% of area median income. If it's land and you're using CPA funds, there needs to be a restriction put on it at the time of acquisition. And so you can't have commercial on that land. You can't have market rate housing on that land. So with acquisition of land, you just want to make sure that if CPA funds are in the deal, that you only want CPA uses on that land. So in many cases, it's cleaner and easier to invest in the actual development where you can proportion. So if it's land that was privately acquired and a developer wants to put mixed income or mixed use with some affordable housing, you could put CPA funds into that deal as long as it's proportional to the number of affordable units, so that you're not paying for the non-CPA eligible uses. And under Section 12, it does allow a nonprofit to enforce the restriction and manage the property, just as an FYI to put that out there in case you hadn't noticed that. And another thing I want to bring up is in Massachusetts, there's the anti-aid amendment to the Massachusetts Constitution. And what this says is that public funds cannot be given or loaned for a private purpose. There has to be a public benefit. And the Department of Revenue has also clarified that payments should be distributed after services are rendered. So with affordable housing, the way that we generally show a public benefit is these three different blue ovals. One is an affordability restriction on units. Two is a lease agreement. So if it's rental assistance that you're investing in, that there needs to be a lease agreement, typically 12 months. And recapture is that with some programs like down payment assistance, the program may offer $5,000 to $10,000 of down payment assistance funds that are zero interest mortgage loan that's forgiven over 5 or 10 years. And then if the house is sold before the end of the term, then the owner would return to the program a proportional amount. So that's what recapture means. So these are typically the ways that we show a public benefit when we're investing in affordable housing. And then just 2 tips. We are in full agreement with the Community Preservation Coalition that CPCs should always be using grant agreements when you're distributing funds, when you're allocating resources. And that includes if you're transferring funds to an affordable housing trust. There should be clear parameters in the grant agreement of why the funds are being transferred or why they're being allocated, what the purpose is, the time that you expect the time frame that you expect the resources to be spent, and notes about how the funds, in what case the funds would be returned to the CPC. And another thing is if you're transferring to an affordable housing trust, the trust is required to report back to the CPC on an annual basis how it's using CPA funds. And I would also suggest that that kind of language be put into a grant agreement of that you expect a report and by what date, because the CPC should be reporting to the state in your CP3 report how funds that have been transferred to a trust have been spent. And then just a quick note is that the CPA area median income numbers may differ from HUD numbers, federal numbers. And the reason is because the Department of Revenue determines the CPA numbers, and they use HUD's numbers at 100% of the area at median income, but for 80%, they just use strict 80%, whereas HUD adjusts for household size. So if you're wanting units that you've invested in to count on the subsidized housing inventory where they have to be 80% using HUD numbers, then you just want to make sure that you're explicit about which numbers the developer should use so that everything actually does qualify for the subsidized housing inventory. So I'm going to shift into eligible activities, and I'm going to be going by the verbs of CPA. So first, in terms of acquiring, funds can be used to help a developer acquire existing housing. This development, 124 units in Barnstable, there had been some affordable units in it, but a lot of it was market. And the nonprofit developer POA was able to use $500,000 of CPA funds in Barnstable to leverage other sources to purchase this full development. And now almost every unit has an affordability restriction. They kept a few at market rate because there were some renters that were not income qualified and they didn't want to displace anyone. But the development had expiring affordability. And so not only did they preserve affordability of those units, but now almost all of the units are affordable, and the community only paid $500,000 for that, which was a very good deal. So that's one way that your CPC could help to create affordable housing in your community. There are buy down programs, so small scale homeownership programs. We have many communities that oftentimes it's the Affordable Housing Trust that manage these programs. So this is essentially helping to buy down the cost of existing smaller scale homes and communities. They're structured in many different ways. Sometimes, like in Norfolk, their housing trust actually buys the homes. So you see the picture in the slide here. They'll try to buy 2 or 3 small homes in the community around the same time, do any rehab necessary, and then run one lottery to sell them to income qualified households at 80% of the area median income. In some communities like Sudbury, they never actually purchase the homes, but they help facilitate a sale. So they will negotiate a sale price with a homeowner who's seeking to sell their home that's a more modest size home. So negotiate a sale price, then they'll run a lottery to see who's income qualified and interested in purchasing the home. And the trust in that case will put in the difference between the negotiated sale price and what makes it affordable to a household earning 80% of the area median income. So they don't actually ever own it, but they help facilitate the sale and they put in the difference, and the amount goes directly to the seller. And then in another community in Western Mass, in Leverett, they actually do vouchers. So they'll do, and of course the housing market is very different than in our areas, but they'll have vouchers, then they'll have it worth, say, $50,000, and maybe they'll have $100,000. They have 2 vouchers worth $50,000, and they'll run a lottery to see who's income qualified, and they do it based on 100% of the area median income. And then 2 people who want to become a homeowner would win a voucher, and then they'd have a certain amount of months to sign a purchase and sale, and then the trust would kick in the voucher amount. So there are a lot of different ways to structure it, but it's really to help create homeownership opportunities in more modest sized housing in the community. They do tend to be a high subsidy per unit, and so it is a slow accumulation of units. And in most communities, it's 1 to maybe 3 units a year. But it is one way that communities help people access homeownership, and then it also can spread that around the community as well. So moving into creating affordable housing, we have a lot of examples of CPCs as well as trusts investing in the creation of new affordable housing. These are just 3 examples. In Norwell, this site was actually it was an old police station, so it was surplus land that the community transferred to their affordable housing trust. And the trust did some pre-development work, wrote a request for proposals, put that out. A nonprofit developer responded, was chosen, and they built 18 units of age-restricted housing and rental housing. Between the trust and the CPC, the community put in $1.2 million to support the creation of this development. In Brewster, this was another public site. I believe it was actually Housing Authority surplus land. And the community did submit for a Mass Works grant to help with some infrastructure, some roadway to get to the site. And then they put out a request for proposals, and the nonprofit developer, it was a couple of nonprofit developers responded, and this development just opened up. It was either this spring or last fall. It's 30 units of rental housing. The local contribution was $550,000 for the 30 units. And then on the right are a couple images from Westport that the community actually spent about 10 years moving towards the completion of this project. The community had 1 or 2 parcels. They had to purchase an adjacent parcel for access to the previously owned sites. They did some pre-development work. They wrote a request for proposals, and then they chose the nonprofit developer, the community builders, and they completed, it was a couple of years ago, maybe 50 units of rental housing there. And you can kind of see from the images that it's this kind of smaller scale, multiple buildings in this village kind of set up, townhouse style homes. And the community, over the length of all these years, acquisition, pre-development, as well as contributing to the development, they put in about $1 million over that time period. And then we see adaptive reuse. So existing buildings that are reused for affordable housing. And sometimes there's a historic component, not always. These particular buildings, all 4 of these are older buildings, although I don't know if any have any historic restriction on them. But in Middleborough, it had been a shoe factory, and a couple nonprofits worked together to redevelop it into 25 units of rental housing. The local contribution was only $25,000 because Middleborough was a brand new CPA community at the time and they just didn't have that much money. But the state respected what they were able to contribute and contributed state resources as well. In Williamstown, this building had been a either a factory or a mill building. And what you see on this is an addition. The right part of the building is an addition, and both of the schools below also have additions to the back of the building, oftentimes with adaptive reuse because they can be very costly to rehab, particularly for affordable housing where your operating income is going to be depressed because rents are low. They can't take out as much debt, so they cost more. Allowing the developer to add additional units can make it more cost effective, more financially feasible. So you'll see that a lot, that there'll be an addition. So Williamstown is now 42 units of rental housing, the local contribution, 200,000. And then the two on the bottom are schools that the community owned. And then they put RFPs out for them to be redeveloped. On the left, a nonprofit, B'nai B'rith, redeveloped that school in Swampscott, 38 units of age-restricted rental housing. And in Auburn, it was Penrose, which is a for-profit developer that's done a significant amount of affordable housing in Massachusetts. That's now 55 units of age-restricted senior housing as well. Sometimes this kind of development can be less controversial than new creating brand new housing, and it can also bring buildings back online. So in many cases, it can be a nice, really fantastic projects for the community. And then shifting to preserve, I just wanted to remind us that preserve in the CPA statute is really a pretty high bar. It's protection of personal or real property from injury, harm, or destruction. It's not rehab. Sometimes communities really want to put everything under preserve, and that's really not the intent of it. And just a reminder that rehab is only if the units were created or acquired by CPA. This makes it tricky for housing authority units that are already created and not created with CPA funds. And we all likely know that our housing authority units they're underfunded. On the right is a document that DHCD, now known as Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, put out a memo explaining the difference between preserve, rehab, and maintenance. So maintenance is never allowed with CPA funds. So really looking at what in an existing unit, like a housing authority unit, could qualify under injury, harm, or destruction. And CHAPA, MHP, and the state CPC were supportive of some of the language in this memo of identifying that if units, housing authority units, are going to be lost because of the condition of the building, that could qualify for preservation funds under CPA. So as an example, the Gloucester Housing Authority Sheedy building years ago, they had a roof that was leaking. One unit had already been shuttered and more were at risk of not being able to be livable. So the Housing Authority requested $86,000 in CPA funds to supplement state modernization formula funding of $196,000 to use to replace their over 30-year-old roof so that no units would be lost and the one that had been shuttered could be opened and lived in. So if it has to do with the envelope, if it's threatening the use of units, then that could qualify under preserve. If it's rehab of kitchens, of bathrooms, like that's rehab, that is not preservation. But generally, when we talk about preserving affordable housing, we're really talking about preserving units that have expiring affordability restrictions. So for example, in Amherst, there was this large development, Rolling Green, 204 units, 41 of the units were affordable, but their affordability restrictions were expiring. They were only 15 years long under financing with Mass Housing. They were set to expire. And the owner at the time was not interested in extending the affordability. And the community was really concerned about losing these crucial non-age restricted units in the community. They reached out to MHP and we worked with them, and a plan was made to reach out to Beacon Communities, a for-profit developer that has extensive experience in Chapter 40B, multifamily housing, affordable housing, low-income housing tax credits, And they agreed to negotiate with the owner at the time to purchase this site. And their CPC, the community, decided to bond $1.25 million of CPA funds to contribute to this development to help the acquisition happen. So these 41 units are now affordable in perpetuity for the town of Amherst. So this is a great way to use CPC funds to preserve the affordability, long-term affordability of any units that might have expiring affordability in your community. And then lastly, support. The kinds of activities that have been seen eligible under support are things like doing some pre-development work on a municipal site that you think could be feasible for affordable housing. So it could be doing some initial work around the feasibility of using the site. There could be some initial testing, soil testing, et cetera. Some communities have used CPA funds to update their housing plans or housing production plans. Rental assistance is explicitly called out in the CPA statute as an allowable use of CPA funds. And during the pandemic, a lot of CPA funds went towards emergency rent assistance. So a lot of different ways that you can be using your resources, and all of these examples that I gave can be funded by CPCs as well as housing trusts. A few years ago, the housing trust statute was modified so that all of the eligible activities under community housing with CPA are eligible activities for housing trust as well, to make those statutes consistent. So lastly, I'm going to shift to just some tips on working with housing trusts, some suggestions that I've made in multiple trainings over the years and when I'm working with CPCs and trusts. At this, or maybe I should just say, at this time, we have about almost 140 affordable housing trusts in the state. So we're gaining on CPC communities, although there still are more CPC communities. And about 76% of housing trust communities also have CPC. So having the CPA, passing the CPA locally is oftentimes the impetus to create a housing trust, which you may already know. So the first thing is just to identify housing needs, and do not do that in a vacuum, that this should be a community-wide effort, that it shouldn't be the trust identifying needs, the CPC doing it separately, the planning board doing it separately. There should be a housing plan that the community embraces and that everyone uses this data to determine needs and to help create policy and what you're investing in program-wise or development-wise. So we would just urge, I meant to check to see how current your housing needs and assessment or housing production plan is, but we would just encourage you to be using the same kind of data. So you're speaking the same language. And CPA, of course, can fund housing trusts. It's explicit in the CPA statute. And there are different ways that CPCs do this. Some require the trust to apply for a specific program or project. Some allow the trust to apply for funds, but not a specific purpose. I mean, it might be a general purpose, or the language might be for CPA eligible purposes, but some allow it to not be really explicit. And then some CPCs just recommend a percentage of CPA funds without expecting an application every year. So for example, Cambridge, for the whole time that they've had CPA, they just transfer 80% of their CPA funds to their trust every year. They really use their trust as their community housing arm of their CPC. And because housing is such a crisis in Cambridge, they've just put most of their funds towards housing. Somerville transfers about 45% every year, and they don't expect an application. So that does happen. There are some towns that transfer the 10% without an application. So it just depends on the community. It can depend on leadership, on politics, but there are a variety of ways that communities support trusts with CPA funds. Again, I'm just going to reiterate that we always suggest grant agreements, even when you're transferring funds to a municipal housing trust or any municipal departments, any municipal boards. We just always suggest that you have a grant agreement in place so that there's clarity on the purpose of the funds. We would suggest that you have conversations up front between the CPC and the trust. How will the boards work together? What do the boards need from each other? Can CPA funds pay for administrative costs of the trust? This is, many trusts want to use CPA funds to help with staff support, and not every CPC wants to or is clear that that's what's going to happen. And so this conversation should happen up front. 5, again, the trust needs to be reporting back to the CPC on an annual basis how it's spending CPA funds. On the right is just a screenshot of a fillable form of fillable Word document that I created in partnership with Stuart Saganor at the Community Preservation Coalition to help trusts report back to the CPC. It uses all of the language as the Department of Revenue uses in the CP3. So it's the same language. We also have a set of directions because while you would think it'd be clear and easy to fill in, the language that DOR uses is actually, I think, pretty confusing. So we have directions as well. But your CP3 report is due on September 15th, and we really urge CPCs to be explicit with trusts about when you expect a report back each year. Obviously, if they didn't spend any money, they don't need a report. But we want, there are a lot of gaps in the information that we have about how CPA housing funds are being spent because the money that goes to trusts aren't always reported back in the CP3 report. 6, when you have different entities working on affordable housing, we just encourage conversations to clarify your roles. This could include housing authorities. It could include a housing partnership or committee, trusts, CPCs. This is just what Manchester did in their housing production plan. They have a bunch of housing strategies. On the left, they determine shorter term strategies, longer term, and then on the right, they'll lead boards just so there's clarity on who's focusing on what and accountability as well. 7 is ensure transparency. Be really clear of the work that you're doing. We all know that housing development is controversial. Affordable housing is typically even more controversial. Don't make it difficult for people to understand who you are, what you're doing. Between the CPC and the trust, you may want to have a joint board appointment, someone who sits on both of your boards to help with communication. You want to make sure that you're reporting back regularly to each other and other boards in the community. When you do invest in housing, promote those efforts, use the webpage or social media so that it's not difficult for people to understand what you're investing in and what your plans are. And that goes for the trust as well. And then instead of competing with each other, really try to complement each other's efforts to increase the supply of affordable housing. Center both of your efforts, the trust and the CPC, on the goal of more housing in Southborough. Lastly, you can try to work together to create a culture of support. There was an activist in Amherst who used this phrase, culture of support, which I really appreciate. Acknowledging that it's not just a one-time thing, that you create a space where people are supporting diverse housing options. It's not just one development. It really is a long-term effort. It takes a lot of different people, and it's something that you build slowly. There's this one study. You don't have to live here. You could Google it. It's a really quick read, but it was Enterprise with another entity that they tested housing messages in the market just to see how people reacted to things. And so it's really interesting of what resonates and what really backfires. And some things that they point out is to really balance people with places and systems. Instead of just talking about people that need affordable housing, talk about the systems and the places that make it difficult for people to access housing they can afford. Instead of telling this, or tell the story of us rather than the story of them. People who need affordable housing, people who have lower incomes, they are a part of us. They are part of our workforce. They are our neighbors. So instead of them, really, it's a part of us. Connecting housing to other social issues and outcomes. We know by so much research that when people have safe and affordable housing, their health outcomes and their educational outcomes increase. And the opposite happens when their housing is not stable. We know that where you live affects your outcomes. And what they also tested is language that we use. They tested home versus housing, and they found that people responded to housing as if like it's a commodity, or public housing. And even though public housing is incredibly important in our communities, a lot of people have negative reactions to it. But when you say homes, it's where they find themselves and their family. It's personal. And so even giving some consideration to how you talk about the need for diverse housing options in Southborough can be important. And then to do this in collaboration so that you're speaking similar kind of language that can be the most effective in your community is something that you can do perhaps together. And then just 3 final things that I like to leave with communities. I do acknowledge that you're a volunteer board, that your boards are volunteer. So we really urge you to consider your local infrastructure, the resources that you already have, the assets that you already have, the needs that you have, and to really consider what is kind of the focus or the niche of the CPC as well as the Housing Trust based on your existing infrastructure. Develop goals that really reflect identified needs. It can be really tempting to take the path of least resistance to decide that you're going to invest in certain kind of developments because you think it'll be the most accepted at town meeting or in the community, but that's not always a reflection of the greatest need in the community. So we really urge you to start with current data, to have a to build off of current data that shows really where the housing need is most strong in your community, and then be real about your capacity. The housing needs are significant in all of our communities. You have limited resources, limited capacity. So try to do 1, 2, or 3 housing things really good instead of just really struggling to do anything well. We have tons of online resources, and I will send this to Freddie as a PDF, and you can have that. And I am a resource as well. So you will get these PDF, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there's just any questions from the audience. Share. I know that was a lot. I hope it wasn't too much.
Yeah, so if there are any questions from folks in the audience, I see some likely candidates. Okay, a hand has gone up, Dorianne. Betsy, could you promote Dorianne up?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Good evening, Shelley. Thank you so much. Very informative presentation, actually answered a lot of my questions. But just so you have a heads up, our HPP was completed in 2020, and we did a 5-year strategic plan in 2021. So we are
Fantastic.
Slowly working our way to get some more affordable housing in town, but that's where we are at right now.
Fantastic.
But thank you.
And are you on a different board or a resident?
I'm on SHOPC, which is the Southborough Housing Opportunity Partnership, but I am also on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I'm on the 2 boards. So thank you for tonight.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, Dorianne. Is there anybody else with a question for Shelley? I'd like to say that we have had, over the past couple of years, a groundswell of new interest in getting some affordable housing finally accomplished here in Southborough. And I'd like to say that Dorianne has been kind of a gadfly getting that going. Credit where credit is due. It was fantastic here tonight to hear from an expert in this with experience in it, to give us a roadmap, but also seeing successfully completed projects around the Commonwealth makes it feel like it's actually achievable.
Yep.
And at first we were disappointed that we weren't going to all be able to meet in person, but I now realize that having this recording that we can point folks to here in town, I think we had a conflicting meeting tonight with some folks we hoped would attend. It's going to be a great resource for us. And I just wanted to thank you very much for joining us here this evening. This has been very valuable, very informative. And also, it's painful not being able to ask any questions. I wish things hadn't happened the way they did, but such is life on a volunteer committee.
So you will have the PDF, you'll have my email, and any of you can just reach out with any questions. I also was given some questions by Freddie, and I answered them and made it into a PDF, and I sent it to her. So that can be distributed. So I think there's some questions that sometimes come up with your group. We also have the housing toolbox. We have tons of recorded different trainings, and I can send to Freddie some like key ones that might be helpful for you if you just so that you know that the resource is there if you ever want to browse. I know that you don't have tons of time to sit around watching videos, but they're there just so you know that they're there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
Okay, then I'm going to say goodnight, I guess. Okay.
Great. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
So we find ourselves at, because we're not really able to participate as committee members, we're here at 7:44. Our public information forum isn't scheduled until 8 o'clock. And typically in a situation like this, we would go through and you know, review past minutes and take care of that kind of clerical type stuff. Unfortunately, we simply can't do that here tonight. I'm looking at the rest of our agenda. Let's see. I wonder, Freddie, would you be able to give us a quick rundown on the status of the townhouse restoration bond? Obviously, we couldn't ask any questions, but just to bring us up to speed.
Townhouse restoration, when we went to town meeting, planning our budget for last year, we inquired from the town treasurer what the bond amount for the townhouse was going to be. And his best information at the time was that it wasn't going to happen that fast and it wouldn't go out to bond this year. So we didn't put anything aside in the budget to pay for the bond. Then it went back out to bid again, I think, and it came back favorably and it started on like warp speed, I guess. And they were able to start work. Needed funding, had to put out a short-term bond, which required a short-term bond payment, which is due in October. I have to check back with Brian on how we can fund that. If there's some talk of a second town meeting, fall town meeting, if that happens, maybe it will fit into play. But if not, we're stuck with a little quandary because we have money set aside. If you remember the townhouse, we had money that was bonded and some money taken from one of the buckets, the general and reserve fund. Well, that was to fund the project. It wasn't to fund a bond. So we have no existing to fund the bond monies for that project. Brian's identified some other bond money repayment line item, but I think it was for a different bond. So we need to look into if there was some leftover bond payment money for, say, the library. Can we use that to pay for the townhouse? You know, so we need to look into it. And it's only about $20,000. And I don't know if, I mean, I need to talk to Brian, and also we need to find out about the fall town meeting and if that will work to make that payment. So it's an unknown entity, but we somehow need to, not that we don't have the funds, it's that we don't have the funds in the right account.
Okay, so yeah, again, we can't ask questions or really discuss this. I think we need to have this on the agenda for our next meeting. One thing that we are allowed to discuss, I don't know how productive we can be with only 3 members present, but our next meeting dates. Perhaps we can get sort of a general idea of what we're looking at. Trying to recall, had we scheduled, didn't we have something scheduled in August? I guess not.
No, we had no meeting in August yet. We usually take August off.
That's right. So September 21st is the first that I'm seeing.
Yes.
Oh boy, it's really tough to schedule an August meeting, but it really does feel like it would be helpful to have one, frankly.
Can I jump in? I think
we have a July meeting, or would it just be August?
Do we have a July meeting?
We don't have a July meeting, but
No.
I would say, I think there was a feeling when we were doing the long-term planning that you didn't need either the July or August meetings. And I don't think that is true today, but I think that discussion needs to be, we can schedule a meeting via email. You have too many people who need to be consulted, not in the room tonight.
Oh, I think Kristen just entered the audience, just so you know.
Yep, there she is.
Oh, great.
But we also have 2 or 3 other members who aren't here. And I think you want to hear from them on future dates after June 30th.
Yeah, so let's try very hard to coordinate something. To throw it out there, something like July 20th for us and for folks who came tonight for both the housing presentation from Shelley, but also for our community forum. Again, we won't be able to answer questions there either. If we can get a meeting sometime in mid-July together, we could answer questions that have been submitted by email, or folks could attend that meeting, but one way or the other, take care of that.
So we'll do a poll. It will be painful, but we'll get through it.
Okay.
Whittle it down to start, and then.
Okay.
I'll just say I'm free, or I'm happy to meet over the summer, so I'm pretty flexible in that regard. Depending on everyone else, of course.
Thank you, Grant. I've been thinking here, so because we don't have a quorum, we never even really officially opened the meeting. I don't want to keep folks, and now that we've run out of topics that we can cover, I really don't want to keep folks just sitting here staring at a screen for 10 minutes. Freddie, can you think of a reason why we can't go forward with with our public forum at 10 minutes before 8? I can't.
I can if somebody comes at 8 and thought they were going to see it. So I would suggest that you could, because it's not a meeting, so we're not adhering to an agenda, correct?
Correct.
You start the public forum, and if someone or lots of people join at 8,
then I will recap
you can at the end of the presentation, because we can't really take questions from the people because the only one to answer them is the committee.
Yeah.
So if people show up at 8, note where you are in the presentation, and at the end of your presentation, you go through the beginning at that slide so that they don't miss out because they thought it was starting at 8.
Great idea. So let's do that. I am going to, let's see. I'm going to share my screen.
Yes. You should be allowed to do it. There you go.
Okay. Let's see here. First slide. Here we are. All right. So every year we are, in fact, required by the Community Preservation Act to put together a public forum to accomplish a bunch of things, teach the community about the Community Preservation Act, about the Community Preservation Committee, and how we work, and to talk about how the community's CPA funds are invested in the community. This overview really is kind of a mini agenda of what this PowerPoint is going to be about. I won't really go down into the weeds here because we're going to cover all of it through the presentation. The current Preservation Committee, these are our current members with one exception. At the very top, Andrew Mills, our former chair. This would be his last meeting under his current term. However, he and his wife moved out of town, and he left the committee about a month and a half ago. So we're down to 5 of us right now, which gives us just a bare quorum. And if even one of us isn't present, we can't have a meeting, and thus all the trouble scheduling. But as I alluded to earlier, it sounds like we have a couple of new members who will be joining up at the start of new terms, which I believe is after July 1st, which we're looking forward to. So what is the Community Preservation Act? I'll go through this, and then I'll say what I think it is. It's a smart growth tool that helps communities preserve open space and historic sites, create community housing, and develop outdoor recreational facilities. Those are the things that we're allowed to do under the Community Preservation Act. In fact, the only things that we can do. These we're permitted to do. It helps strengthen state and local economies by expanding housing opportunities, construction jobs for the Commonwealth's workforce, and supporting the tourism industry through the preservation of the Commonwealth's historic and natural resources. And as we go through some of the projects we've done, we'll see evidence that that absolutely has been happening here in Southborough. What the Community Preservation Act does in practical terms is, during a town's typical budgeting process, the folks involved in it will sit down and they get through education and public safety, public works, town administration, and frankly, even in a good year, there's just nothing left. And there are certain types of projects that always, when it comes time to budgeting, get pushed off the edge of the table. And the CPA was envisioned to plug that hole into, or to try to get some of these projects funded. Restoring the historic town library, or acquiring a once in a lifetime opportunity to acquire some beautiful open space. Things that make our community a wonderful place to live, that it just is so difficult to fund using the traditional funding sources. And that's what I think of as the purpose of the Community Preservation Act. And that's what it's done for us here in Southborough. So just real quick history, the way it works, a town can vote to approve the Community Preservation Act, to adopt it rather, and to choose a surcharge of between 1% and 3%. Southborough chose 1% surcharge, began collecting revenue in 2003, created the CPC in 2004, and the very first projects were approved at town meeting 2005. So this has been going on for quite a while now, 18 years, nearly 20. Our obligations on the CPC is to develop a CPA plan for the town. Without going through all of this, a couple of things, are the reasons that we're here tonight. In developing an annual budget, unfortunately, we being unable to answer questions kind of throws a monkey wrench into this, but we certainly hope to hear what projects folks are envisioning and that they might come seeking funding for, so we can plan and budget and try to see how we can serve the greatest number of people here. And of course, we're also obligated to hold an annual public forum, which we're doing now. So the surcharge between 1% and 3%, that surcharge is a surcharge on your property tax bill, not the assessed value of your property. So the average cost, the cost for an average home in town for this year, fiscal year 2023, is $103.84. Later on, I'm going to go through the history of some of the projects that have been funded through the CPA. And I think it becomes apparent very quickly that we have gotten tremendous value for the money that we've spent here in town. We heard mention of the buckets from Shelley's presentation, and in the Community Preservation Act requires that funds collected through this surcharge be allocated to certain categories of things that can be funded under the Community Preservation Act, listed here: open space, historic preservation, and community housing. Each are allotted 10% of the total receipts from the surcharge. Up to 5%, there's a 5% bucket can be used for the administration of the Community Preservation Act. And while recreation is an allowable source for a target for funding, rather, it doesn't have its own bucket, and it's simply funded out of the general unreserved portion of our budget. That is the part that didn't go into these 30, the 3 10% buckets and the 5% bucket. leaves 65% of the receipts sort of in the budgeted reserve. So as of the end of last fiscal year, beginning of this fiscal year, excuse me, the balances, as we see on the screen, the CPA fund balance, the reason we don't know that is we're just waiting for an end of the year certification from accounting so that we can know exactly where we stand. These numbers have decreased from where they were, some of them in previous years, because we funded a couple of pretty large projects that we'll see towards the end of the presentation here. So since the first approval of our adoption of this, yes.
Sorry to jump in. That last slide was a mistake.
Oh, excuse me.
Can you go back? That was.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
This one.
All of the accounts are after town meeting what we put into the different buckets. So that would be whenever the data, well, it'll be July 1st, 2023, when that gets counted for what we voted at town meeting. Sorry, these accounts figure in the 10% set aside from the last town meeting.
Okay, thank you.
That's what it should be, July 1st, 2023.
Okay,
sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, so since the adoption of CPA back in 2003, the total collected with the local surcharge, $5.3 million. Interestingly, there's a state match every year. Yeah, this past year, a 38.5% state match, which is a very good one. So by adopting the CPA, Southborough has collected roughly $2.3 million in state funds that we otherwise never would have seen. And here we get to you know, some of the accomplishments of the town of Southborough by adopting the Community Preservation Act. I highlighted some of these. It would take forever to go through this entire list and all the ways in which the various projects have added to the community. But some of the highlights are, you know, the Fayetteville playground and tennis courts. After the microburst came through and sort of flattened the area, the new playground put in is just fantastic. The father, being the father of twins who are now, they've kind of aged out of the playground, but boy, they really did love it. And it's always thronged with kids during warm weather. The purchase of the Halloran property. This is an example of a piece of open space that just happened to come up for sale from a frankly very generous family who offered to sell it to the town for a remarkably low amount of money. And because of the CPA and the town's adoption of it, we were able to purchase it to add to the town's open space. Of course, the preservation restriction on the Burnett House at 84 Main Street. I think we can all think back to you know, where we were 7 or 8 years ago, what it looked like back then in a state of disrepair and what was likely going to happen to it. It was going to be taken down. And then we drive by today. And that's a real accomplishment of the Community Preservation Act. The next real big one, the preservation of Chestnut Hill Farm. This was one of the very first projects that CPC recommended funding for to town meeting. And it's an incredible addition to the town's open space. And every year, the farm becomes a more integral part of the community. It's really a fantastic place. Next up, just for highlights, the restoration of the South Union School. It's an absolutely gorgeous building. You know, the view from Highland, looking up the hill. We're going to see a picture of it in a little while. It really is stunning from all the work done on the restoration, in particular the windows. Of course, the restoration of our library. The facade of the library was, you know, it was starting to really show its age. And as the investigation was done, the work that needed to happen, we realized that there was a lot of degradation behind the scenes, a lot of water infiltration into the facade and weakening of stone and masonry. and it was caught just in time. And because of the CPA, we were able to save that beautiful facade and put a preservation restriction on it so that it will be there, it will be there in perpetuity. And lastly, just on my own little list here, I've highlighted, as an example of recreation project, the lights at Mooney Field and the Neary tennis courts. So obviously I skipped over more than half of the list. It's and this isn't even a complete list of everything that's been funded under the Community Preservation Act in Southborough. For this surcharge, this on average $100 a year per assessed property. What the town has gotten in return, I think, frankly, is remarkable. So the application process. The application itself is available from the CPC website. It can be downloaded as a PDF, and I think it has to be filled in by hand. The deadline for submission is in August. And the submission process basically involves, submit it to the Community Preservation Committee and come into our next meeting and discuss it with the committee. And we work with you to polish up the application to make sure that everything that's being proposed is supportable under the Community Preservation Act. It is fairly specific and in some cases pretty strict about what can and cannot be funded. So we work with you to make sure that your project is fundable, or to help you find ways to make it fundable, and talk with you about strategies for publicizing it, and speaking with selectmen, advisory, and your presentation at town meeting. This is the application itself. We've got a couple of highlights here. Some of the more important pieces of information that we need to know. And again, one of the more important things is we have to make sure that what's being proposed is actually fundable under the Community Preservation Act. In fact, in instances where, it being a pretty complicated piece of legislation in many ways, occasionally, we're not 100% sure. So we are members of the Community Preservation Coalition, which is an incredible resource to the town, where we can, with a phone call generally, ask the most complicated CPA related question and get a straightforward, helpful answer so that we can help an applicant craft an application that is fundable, that we can recommend to town meeting. Yeah, again, eligibility, that's the big thing. To make sure, we have to define exactly how it meets CPA requirements, and we, again, work with you to help understand and make sure that that's the case. We saw this earlier with Shelley. This is a matrix. Again, it's hard to believe that this actually simplifies things, but in fact it does, compared to the sort of the black text of the act itself. And lastly, CPA funding oftentimes is only a piece of how a project is funded. So we asked to learn, what other funding sources have you already used, and what other funding sources are available that you're pursuing, and so forth. And then an important one, after investing, community funds in a project, whatever project it is, whether it be the acquisition of open space, building some sort of project for recreation or historical preservation, or affordable housing, how is ongoing maintenance going to be required so that we don't invest in the big project and watch it slowly degrade and for lack of maintenance? And this is we've learned that this has to be an important part of the plan, is knowing beforehand how it's going to be maintained. And lastly, as part of proposing a project, obviously a big part of that is the schedule that it's going to be completed on, and it's something that the committee needs to know. You know, trying to think if it's ever happened completely. I think there have certainly been instances where projects have been delayed and funds end up being tied up that could potentially have been used for something else. So we want to avoid a situation where we approve funds for a project and then it simply sits on the books for 5 years or 8 years or whatever, when those funds could be used for something else to help the community. Some of the more complicated ones, projects are historical preservation projects. And to simplify this chart, you know, if the building that project is proposed upon is on the State Register of Historic Places, that really simplifies things. If it's not, the Southborough Historical Commission has to determine that it's a resource significant in the history, archaeology, architecture, or culture of the town, and then also has to make a separate finding that the Historical Commission supports the funding of the project through the Community Preservation Act. When those things are true, we then can balance the project against the requirements of the Act. These are the things that are discussed in that eligibility matrix that Shelley showed and I showed just a moment ago. And after getting through all that, we can determine whether or not a project is actually fundable under the Community Preservation Act. So here are some pictures of some of the great successes under Southborough's Community Preservation Act. The South Union School, frankly looking majestic atop the small hill on at 21 Highland. Two separate, well, the building itself, two separate CPA projects. These projects were done before it became the standard operating procedure that buildings upon which CPA funds are spent are now required by the CPC to have a preservation restriction. This work was done to the South Union School prior to having that, prior to that being our practice. Nonetheless, very successful projects resulting in just a gorgeous building. Yeah, on the National Register of Historic Places. The South Union School playground, I'll tell you, a real big hit amongst the 3 to 6 year old set. My daughters really loved it. The town library, as I said, we knew through John Parent with the facilities department that the library needed some work, and once the historical architecture firm got involved and started assessing it, boy, some problem areas were found, underneath the steps and in the facade. And it turns out some work done back in the 80s to replace the roof. The roof wasn't flashed properly, and water was intruding into the masonry, behind the parapet and so forth. And you know what? It was caught just in time. And thankfully, the CPA was in place here, and the funds were available to save this gorgeous building. Some more of the work as it's taking place, taking down the portions of the facade to get behind there to replace the rotted masonry. And we were left with our town's gorgeous library facing Main Street. The Mooney Field lights. And yep, part of the same project, I believe. The lights also at the, no, excuse me, separate project, but also lighting at the Neary tennis courts. And again, Chestnut Hill Farm. The Halloran property that I discussed previously, the Halloran family offered to sell this piece of open space to the town for its assessed value. This is 30 acres of land between Mount Vickery and the Turnpike. and they offered to sell it to us for, I believe the grand total was $135,000. It's a gorgeous piece of land with very interesting topography and a really interesting mix of habitats back there. And we are hoping to, in the future, improve access to it so that it's easier for folks in town to get out and explore. And at 84 Main Street. Again, if we think back 7 or 8 years ago, what it looked like and what the future for this building looked like, which was a likely tear down, and then we drive past it today. You know, this is one of the great successes of the Community Preservation Act in Southborough. Right down to smaller projects, an Eagle Scout project at Neary School, the volleyball field, volleyball court. Fayville Playground, looks like the top lot here. And the pickleball courts, of course. So the last slide, of course, unfortunately, we're unable to answer questions tonight. I've gone through the reasons for that. I apologize for it. As you may have heard earlier, we're very hopeful to get a meeting together in mid-July to answer any questions that you might have. If questions have occurred to you tonight, or they do in the interim, I would encourage you to email those questions to us so that on the night of our next meeting, we can answer them, or of course you can come in person, but if you're unable to attend, if you email them beforehand, these meetings are preserved forever on YouTube. So your question, your question will be answered. And again, one of the big reasons for the public forum here is to talk with folks, to look not only what they're thinking about perhaps applying for this year, but maybe in the coming, 2 years, 5 years, so we can start getting a sense of what's out there, what do we have to budget for, do we have to make room for something or what have you. And I would ask you that if that's the case, if you're contemplating a project, it's an imperfect solution, but if you could please email us and let us know about it. And if it's at all possible, if you could attend our next meeting when we can actually discuss this, that would be fantastic, and it'd be greatly appreciated. And that's it. So again, a crucial part, of course, has to be left out tonight, not being able to deliberate among the members here. I see under our attendees some folks who I suspect would otherwise would be asking us questions.
Ben,
oh, yes.
Oh, sorry, if you don't mind, if I'm not mistaken, can't we still hear from the public as long as we don't respond or deliberate in any way if they have questions or comments or proposals, or is that not the case?
It's a slippery slope. We have to be very careful about violations of public meeting law.
Sure.
Freddie, I would ask your advice on that. I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Meeting, it is too.
Yeah.
Too much of a risk.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's not it's not a chance worth taking. These projects are too important to the community, I think, to take a chance at something being perceived as a violation of public meeting law. So again, I apologize to the folks who have attended tonight for the inconvenience here, but I'd like to assure you that questions that you do have will absolutely be answered. And in the event that you're considering submitting an application, I think I can probably speak for the committee when I say we very much look forward to working with you on that. And with that, I don't know that there's anything else on the agenda that we are able to address this evening. I'm just going to go through it one last time just to make sure, but yeah, I can't even really give the chairman's report. So that's gonna, yeah, these things will have to remain on the agenda for our next meeting, which again, we're hoping to schedule in mid-July. Once we have done that and have settled on a date where we know we will have a quorum, it will be posted on the town's website. And with that, I would like to thank everybody very much for attending tonight. I hope you found our public forum presentation anyhow informative, and I feel pretty confident that Shelley's presentation was incredibly informative to all of us. And so with that, I guess I'm not even looking for a motion to adjourn because technically we haven't really opened the meeting. But thanks again, everybody, for attending, and I look forward to seeing you at our next hearing.
Ben, you did a great job.
Oh, thanks, David.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, Ben.